Dubbed the biggest electoral year in history, over 60 countries representing half of the world's population, about 4 billion people, will hold regional, legislative, and presidential elections that seem set to mobilize political institutions and heighten geopolitical tensions. As the United States looks inward, preparing for a likely showdown between President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump, other countries are also gearing up for potential overthrows of incumbents, strident public protests, and populist movements with the potential to destabilize larger regions. We will know if democracy lives or dies by the end of 2024, said Nobel Peace Prize winner Maria Ressa, founder of the investigative news site Rappler in the Philippines and author of How to Stand Up to a Dictator. In Europe, institutional parties are gearing up for a possible rise of the far right within the European Parliament, including Eurosceptic groups aiming to undermine the EU institutions meant to maintain peace across the 27-member continent. In Asia, elections in Taiwan could heighten tensions in the Indo-Pacific, threatening to drag Washington and other allies in as Taipei and Beijing increasingly confront over the disputed island. And in Africa, elections in Senegal, South Africa, Mali, and Chad could shape the trajectory of multilateral institutions across the continent. In North America, the United States is not the only one facing a highly watched and tense presidential race. In Mexico, a vote could impact critical trade cooperation and border security issues with its northern neighbor. The sheer number of elections also raises questions about new technologies and online misinformation, testing cybersecurity efforts and social media networks to mitigate manipulation risks. 2024 will be an election year like no other, and this will bring unprecedented challenges to online platforms that will work to protect the integrity of online elections, said Katie Harbath, who has advised Republican campaigns on digital strategy and formerly worked as a public policy director at Facebook. Not only will they have many countries to cover, all with different languages, cultures, and regulations, but also new tools like AI for which they need to write new rules. Elections defining democracy in Africa will be held in over a dozen African countries, including major members of continental peacekeeping and economic organizations, as well as in countries where the military overthrew democratically elected governments in coups in recent years. The results of these elections will impact the ongoing battle among foreign countries for influence on the continent, with the United States and Western allies competing to act as a counterbalance to Russian and Chinese investment and security partnerships. The ruling parties of Senegal and South Africa hope to maintain control over power, but face tough fights from opposition groups. Both are forceful voices in the African Union, and Senegal is one of the leading countries of the Economic Community of West African States. South Africa's election will also be economically significant. The ruling ANC party has embraced trade and investment ties with China and Russia as part of the BRICS alliance: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. The South African economy has also lagged with the ANC's mismanagement, exacerbating inequality and stagnation in one of the continent's richest countries. Mali and Chad, which have been under military rule since coups in the last 3 years, have said they would hold presidential elections in 2024. Elections in Belarus, Russia, Iran, analysts do not expect the legislative elections in Belarus and Iran, or a presidential vote in Russia, to immediately change politics in those countries. But protests likely to arise around these votes could prove disruptive and difficult to control. Such unrest could distract each government from its involvement in major international conflicts: for Iran, in the Middle East; for Russia and Belarus, in Ukraine. It could also further heighten tensions with Western countries, which have imposed sanctions on each country's treatment of dissidents in recent years. When Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko declared victory in the widely disputed 2020 presidential elections, winning a 6th term in office, it sparked the country's largest anti-government demonstrations since the fall of the Soviet Union, spanning months. The opposition disputed the results, backed by international allies like the United States and the EU. 4 years later, concerns over Lukashenko's authoritarianism have not dissipated, raising concern among critics that he might try to consolidate even more power in the upcoming parliamentary vote in February, ahead of the next presidential vote in 2025. Russian President Vladimir Putin is poised to be re-elected on March 15th, in a vote he is expected to win after more than 20 years in power. Like Lukashenko, Putin is also expected to face protests. But one of his most outspoken critics, opposition leader Alexei Navalny, is currently jailed